you don't realize how much stress you're taking on when you're not sharing your thoughts and feelings with other people. And so we'll tend to, people who were passive like me will stuff all their feelings, and then they'll come out in ways that are not helpful to us. So dealing with things as they occur and addressing those things, setting appropriate boundaries, and really being more assertive can help with stress.
Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. And today I'm joined by fellow colleague MJ Clark with Integrated Leadership Systems. As a vice president of Integrated Leadership Systems, MJ Clark has been a leadership consultant, executive coach, and workplace trainer since 2006. She helps companies with ownership and management succession, strategic planning, and executive development. She coaches executives to help them help others, to help them keep others accountable, better manage stress, develop emotional intelligence, and become more assertive. She has a master's degree in organizational communication from Ohio State University and is the author of 3 leadership books. Welcome to the show, MJ.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. Thanks.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be talking about thriving under pressure. Before we pressed record, we were talking about how public relations has been named consistently one of the top 10 most stressful positions that you can have in the United States. And I know my colleagues, both in-house and at agency side, and perhaps even especially at agency side, really feel the pressure and stress of working in PR. MJ, talk to me about that a little bit. You said earlier that you've seen some changes in your career.
Yeah, for sure. I know when I very first started practicing PR, that was about 30 years ago. And we had a much more defined audience at that time. You know, we just thought about the public, we thought about internal audiences. And I think just with the advent of technology and the changes that it has ushered in, we have so many more audiences now, just online audiences and podcasts and different websites that we're interacting with and all the social media. There's just a lot more to pay attention to. And I think that just creates more stress for this industry.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I often tell people that, you know, the primary foundational skill sets of PR and communication hasn't changed, right? You still need to be able to communicate very well, both verbal and written. You also need to understand strategy. You need to be a trusted advisor. You need to understand how to use communication as a way to solve problems. But we've got so many more tools in our toolbox now, and we're inheriting, just like our colleagues in journalism are inheriting many more platforms that we have to be responsible for. So there was a time where when I was a journalist, I'd show up, I'd write my story, I'd submit my story, I'd be done. Nowadays, journalists are expected to write their stories, post about it on social media, blog about it, perhaps appear on other, media formats like, to be interviewed about their news stories that they wrote, or just go on, live or produce their own reels. So they've we've all become almost our own individual media companies. So a corporation is now a media company trying to produce their own content. A journalist is their own media company. And then, with the advent of, text messaging and social media and the internet and now AI, we have a lot more tools in our toolbox that we have to not only be on the cutting edge of learning it, but then teaching others how to use it and leveraging it for ourselves. So, the days of being, working with a computer that could do desktop publishing, and send out, and sending news releases is changed significantly. You and I have been doing this long enough to remember probably, sending your news releases through a fax machine, right?
Yes.
And so, it's been fun to be part of the ride, but it is also obviously can be very stressful.
I agree.
So how do we jump into helping public relations, communication, marketing professionals, marketing and leaders thrive under pressure? I think where we go first, perhaps, is to talk about how stress is more complex than just fight or flight?
Yes, I really think that is a key point. I think fight or flight is the response that researcher Hans Selye in the 1970s came up with. And I think a lot of people are familiar with that. What he labeled that research was the general adaptation response. And what he was talking about there was that our fight or flight response is adaptive, literally from caveman days. So if you picture like you're sitting in your cave and a saber-tooth tiger comes walking in, our adrenal glands are dumping adrenaline to give us energy and also cortisol to thicken our blood, among other chemicals that our adrenal glands produce. So what happens is that saber-tooth tiger comes in and that adrenaline gives us the energy to either fight, like take our club and beat the saber-tooth tiger, or to run out of the cave to save our family and distract this animal. And maybe we run up a tree, so we need that energy. And the cortisol actually thickens our blood. So if that saber-tooth tiger should catch up to us and take a chunk out of us, it really thickens our blood. It helps it coagulate quickly so that we don't bleed out. So how we experience stress today is very similar. We have a very similar brain, actually, that we had in caveman days. So it's no longer the saber-tooth tiger. It's like the deadline that this reporter has that now becomes that stressor. So our body reacts in the same way. We're getting these chemicals from our adrenal glands that are impacting our body and how we exhibit stress symptoms. So those are the two ways that people generally think about it, fight or flight. And then there's also freeze that came out after Hans Selye's research. And freeze, several researchers really have pointed to this kind of response to stress. And what it does is it's when people become kind of paralyzed and overwhelmed by stress. They might feel super hypervigilant, like what's going to happen next. So that's the third response that I see that people generally have to stress. A fourth response is something called the challenge response. And this came out of research from Kelly McGonigal, who is a psychologist at Stanford. And what she found was that this challenge response is similar to what we have when we're working out. So if we're working out and we start feeling really additional energy and our heart rate rises just like it would if we were having fight or flight, we also, though, have access to our cognitive ability. So we can really think clearly and we can focus, which is unlike that fight or flight response. That is more of a response of panic inducing so that we can't think clearly. So the challenge response, as McGonigal found, was a lot more therapeutic. It's kind of how we're thinking about it in a more healthy way. The stress is a challenge, but I'm pushing through. I'm working out really hard. And even though my body wants to stop, I'm committed to this. So it's a very different response than fight, like I'm scared and I'm doing this, or flight, like I got to get out of here. I've got to avoid this terrible thing. And then the fifth response that I see is it's really interesting research that came out of UCLA. There's a researcher named Shelley Taylor, and she and her colleagues were in a research lab, and they started noticing that every time it was a stressful environment, like something was going wrong with the research, all the men seemed to leave and go off separately. And all the women tended to stick around and make coffee and kind of comfort each other and troubleshoot what was going on. So they started looking at the research back in the day of Hans Selye, like what was going on with all this research, because we're not really fighting or fleeing. And what they did was they really dug into researching specifically women under stress. They found that Hans Selye's research was like 98% of the subjects were men. Mm-hmm. So what they started doing was just researching women specifically. And their response that they identified is called tend and befriend. So the tending is like, back to the caveman example, if the man runs out away from the cave with the pursuit of the saber-toothed tiger on his tail, the women are protecting the children, they're kind of tending to them. They're all getting together as a community and talking through the stressor. So I thought that was kind of interesting research that they found. It has since been re-researched by many others. And in that subsequent research, they found it's not only women. There are some men who also have this response, but it's just largely women that respond in this tend and befriend way.
Okay. So as I'm taking some mental notes here, I think what I'm hearing you say is the 5 ways our body responds to stress is fight, flight. Was the third one pause?
Freeze.
Freeze. Okay. 4
Pause would be good too.
What's that?
Pause would also be acceptable. Okay. It's kind of in that same category.
Yeah. And then challenge was the other one. And at first I wrote down the word comfort, and then you called it tend and befriend. But I felt like kind of comforting was part of it too, maybe, or community comforting.
It is kind of that. The researchers label it tend and befriend, just like you would say fight or flight.
Right.
But it's very much what you said. It kind of it's a caregiving kind of response. And actually, these researchers, they found that with the oxytocin, when our adrenal glands dump oxytocin in our systems, it's a real calming type of chemical. And they found that with women, estrogen actually converted that oxytocin into this calming effect, where with men, the testosterone has no different effect with oxytocin. So that's some of why they started realizing that women tend to behave in this way under stress more than men. It's really their own body's chemicals reacting to the adrenal glands dumping this oxytocin in.
I wonder if they took a look at the chemistry makeup of the men that tend to favor that same behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and it's been re-researched, and there were others who found that it was, even though it was primarily female, males also fell into this category, just to a lesser degree. But I have not read specifically, Jason, to your point, like what was different about the men that fell into this.
Sure. Well, we all have different levels, and
we do.
You never know. So when you come back to the 5th one, the tend and befriend, the example I think you shared, was while they were doing research, they found that the men tend to flee, or would that be flight? Is that ultimately what they were saying? Okay, yeah.
All right, gotcha. Flee or flight, same thing. They just wanted to get out of there and avoid the situation, and they did not flee together. Right. They did not go in the same direction. They all went their separate ways and then kind of regrouped and came back.
It sounds like typical men. All right. Well, that's very helpful. And something good. I think we should all kind of think about how we naturally tend to respond to stress. And, to me, kind of a little relief that, my stress seems pale in comparison to dealing with a saber-toothed tiger entering a den and having to protect your loved ones, if you will, or your tribe.
For sure. It is less today, isn't it?
So let's talk secondly about knowing how you experience stress. I know that can be physical, emotional, cognitive, or mental, and how knowing how you experience stress can help you combat stress. I've been wanting to do an episode for a while about how to deal with the high stress of this profession. And so hopefully we can dive right into this.
Yeah, I would love to. I think a lot of people have symptoms of stress and they have no idea that they are symptoms. They don't think of it that way. So they think like, oh, I've got a really bad headache, or I've got some stomach upset, or my mouth is really dry. I've got chest pains. All of those things are physiological symptoms of stress, muscle tension, rapid heartbeat, when you have trouble falling asleep, all of those things are physiological. We also then have some physical things that point to stress as well, like fatigue or having the jitters, things like that. When we get colds a lot, like people say, man, I keep getting colds, that is actually a symptom of stress. There's also some emotional things that point to stress, like irritability, which is my favorite one, like a short temper. There are things like that physically, fatigue, things like that physically are symptoms of stress. And then physiologically, or rather emotionally, that irritability and that short temper, a lot of times we see that and we think, well, I'm stressed, that's why I'm having these. But some of those other symptoms, I think, are more elusive, and we don't attribute them directly to stress. And, to your point about how does identifying what's going on for you, what are some of those symptoms, how does that help us combat it? It's really about looking for patterns. What is happening with me? I'm awfully irritated, every time my mother-in-law comes over. So what does that mean? So it helps us understand triggers. If we can see these patterns, and like I have this upset stomach every time I go to a conference, for instance, things like that, then we know that is a sign of stress. And then we can really plan for managing it. If I know every time my mother-in-law comes over, I'm sick to my stomach, then I can recognize she is coming. What do I do to combat that? Because I know I'm going to be stressed.
Yeah. Is that just take a Tums, or is there something more?
There are lots of things that we can do, and I'm happy to share those if you want to go into some ways that we can manage our stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap, so it's understanding there's 5 ways our body responds to stress. It's knowing how we experience stress that can help us combat it. And now I think we're jumping right into how do we go about combating it?
Yeah, I think there are ways to manage it that really go beyond the things that we typically think. I think we always think about, I have to exercise more, I need to eat well, I need to get enough sleep, I need to take a vacation. I think those are things that are very common in terms of how we manage stress. And I do want to talk about some things that maybe those listeners to this podcast might not think about quite so much.
Okay.
So one of those things is setting boundaries. And that is something for me that I've worked really hard on. I was very passive during much of my adulthood. So you don't realize how much stress you're taking on when you're not sharing your thoughts and feelings with other people. And so we'll tend to, people who were passive like me will stuff all their feelings, and then they'll come out in ways that are not helpful to us. So dealing with things as they occur and addressing those things, setting appropriate boundaries, and really being more assertive can help with stress.
Okay, I feel a little bit called out because I do very similarly, right? I kind of bottle it up, keep it to myself, and that kind of thing. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Enjoy 30 days free of Audible Premium Plus by going to ontopofpr.com/audible.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
You mentioned previously, that managing stress beyond exercise, healthy eating, and taking vacations, right? And so those all sound like good ways to manage stress. What I keep hearing from other podcasts and other, content creators is the idea of, sleep being undervalued and maybe staying hydrated. What are some other ways we can manage stress, like beyond those things that we hear so much about?
Yes, I think one of the things that I tell clients all the time to do is journaling. I don't know if you've ever tried journaling, Jason, but some of my clients have never attempted it. And journaling has a lot of health benefits. It lowers your blood pressure. It increases your immunity levels, which we all need with all of the germs going around these days. So it has a lot of health effects. And I am a firm believer that if you journal, and the way I'm talking about journaling is writing down our thoughts and feelings, deciding on paper how we're going to address some of those problems in our lives. Those are the journaling aspects that really help us mitigate stress. And then also, you can change your thoughts. So I know in the speaking that I do, I often talk about cognitive behavioral psychology, which is, how our mind impacts the things that we do. How we think about things leads to our behavior. So ultimately, if I'm stressed and let's say I'm having anxiety or fear or worry or whatever you want to label it, if I'm having that emotion, the emotion is actually coming from my thoughts. So to control our thoughts is a very healthy way to stop stressors from coming. If we control what we're thinking or how we're thinking about it, it creates an emotion that is more positive, and we will in turn behave in ways that are more helpful to us typically.
Yeah, I've become a big believer of that. I've also heard, and I hope I don't misquote it on the spot here, but what is it? Thoughts become emotions or feelings, and feelings and emotions become actions, and actions become results.
Yes.
So that's a concept that I've recently heard or started looking into and kind of shifting my own, mindset. And the other thing I heard is that your subconscious mind, obviously influences your conscious mind, and your subconscious mind can't discern truth from fiction. And so if you, do what a lot of people call that, affirmations, if you do a lot of affirmations, you can convince your subconscious mind very easily, apparently, to believe something that then can influence your conscious mind to believe it as well, or that it's true. So these are kind of new concepts to me, at least. And, and certainly journaling can play, an important role in that as well.
I'm so glad you brought up affirmations. That is a really excellent tool. And again, one that I don't think is used all that often. Definitely we can create sentences. How you write them is to create a sentence in the first person saying what you hope to be as though it is fact already.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you said, Jason. You can write these out and recite them during the day. I used to, back in the 80s, I learned about affirmations, and I used to keep them on 3x5s in my purse. And I would drag it out while I'm waiting for an appointment and read through them. But they definitely work, because I know for me over time, I would end up crossing out the ones that were just rote. They just became part of who I am and how I think.
How about that?
So they really do work over time. That's an excellent suggestion.
So MJ, if somebody's listening or watching this episode and they're hearing what we're sharing with them and they're finding value in it, what would be your prescription or recommendation for them? It's kind of the next steps. If they're like, I liked what MJ talked about, should the first thing they do start journaling? Like, where would you encourage them to get started?
I love the thought of having them journal. Like I said, I recommend that to every coaching client that I have. Also, I do want to share the flip of metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking. The flip of that is, if you don't want to start from the inside, is starting from the outside. There's a really interesting researcher named Amy Cuddy, and she talks about how we position our body, also giving us confidence and taking away some of those stress hormones that are in our body. So even posing in ways that are powerful. And some of your listeners may have heard about this already, but they call it like the Superman pose, when you're standing with your head up and your hands, and fists on your sides. So you can do that stuff externally, and it has the same effect as you were talking about, Jason, from the metacognition, deciding how to think and putting thoughts in our head. Making our bodies pose in certain ways can also influence our brain. It's thinking, wow, she must be really confident. Her head is high and she's, looking really confident. So I would say all of these different steps that we're talking about that could be taken, choose one is what my suggestion would be. Choose one way that you think resonates with you that you can try to incorporate into your life. So be it journaling, which, by the way, I have a really cool handout that I sometimes give when I speak on journaling. I'm happy to share that. Or the setting boundaries. In my third book, I talk about how to have assertive conversations with people. So I would just choose one and say, this is the thing that I'm going to try for the next month or so, and see if that starts working for you. See how you feel, because you're not going to be able to measure it like we PR people like to measure things. You're not going to be like 20% more confident, but you will feel it. You'll feel it in your bones. You'll start to, share your thoughts and feelings more, for instance, and you'll know that your efforts are working.
Well, we would love to share that handout in our episode notes. So if you'll do that,
sure.
we'll certainly be thrilled to do that. Thank you for offering it. Sure. I want to ask you about your new book, and then I want to ask you maybe a couple of questions that are a little tangential to our conversation today.
Absolutely.
You've got a book called Leading Through Listening. Tell us more about that.
It's really about assertive communication, and specifically for communicators. So PR people, marketing experts, internal comms folks. It's really about how we as communicators like to talk and organize and be right in it. And sometimes we are not the best at listening. And I really feel like communication begins with listening. In that way, we learn so much more about other people that really creates a much more functional response to them. We're really communicating better and with more clarity when we understand more about them. So that's really the premise of the book. There are things in there about, as I said, assertive communication. There's some journaling items in there. There's a little bit about technology. It's really for communicators to think about their approach to communication and hopefully how they have evolved over time and continue to get better at that.
Okay, nice. So I mentioned I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm kind of pulling these from your bio, but you said you coach executives to help them keep others accountable. Any just kind of quick tips or high level recommendations for how to do that better?
I think people can't make people be accountable. So maybe some people like to disagree with this, but I honestly think accountability is something that's in each of us. So we can influence and inspire, which I think are true leadership traits. And that's how we get people more accountable. When we listen well, when we trust, so we assign them things and allow them to fail in small ways if they're going to do that so they can learn. And if we don't micromanage, but do some follow-up and have discussions with them about, is this the appropriate amount of follow-up, do you feel? Mm-hmm. If you feel like I'm constantly asking where projects are, maybe it would work better if you come to me with updates on a regular basis instead of me coming to you. So I think it's a lot about accountability, is a lot about communication and being a safe place for them to ask questions, but not so much something we can enforce.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think through that a little bit. And then the other thing I want to ask you about was about being more assertive. I have had some conversations with my own team, when we're working with clients, they are genuinely looking for us to be trusted advisors and expert advisors to them. And sometimes in all the noise and the busyness of the business world, I feel like they don't fully hear us, and so I've kind of encouraged my team to be, to take the lead and being more assertive and make sure that you're not through body language or just passive communication, agreeing with something that you fundamentally don't agree with, and being assertive enough to make it clear that say, I'm hearing you say A, I want to be clear that I don't agree with A and I think B is a better option or something like that. And some people don't want you to, disagree with them. They're looking for people to agree, but we still have to be that advisor who, guides them through difficult situations or conversations. So any tips on someone who might not feel comfortable being assertive, but they're being asked or challenged to be more assertive?
Yes, I think people who help and want to say yes are an epidemic in our PR industry. I think we're loaded with people who really want to serve, and it's a double-edged sword for sure. So I think we always think, the client's always right, and they're not necessarily always right. So how do we help them the best way we know how? And sometimes it is politely disagreeing. So in my book, I talk about a 3-step process to having an assertive conversation. And I'd be happy to share that if you think it would help your listeners.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So step 1 is describe that person's behavior. And I usually use the words I've noticed, ... So let's say we're talking to a client who wants to put out a press release that you think would be harmful to them. So I've noticed that you feel really strongly about this press release, and you want us to send it despite our counsel that we not. So you're just laying out the facts. They know that you've had this conversation. You know it, they know it, so there's no surprise.
Right.
So step 1 is designed to not get reactivity out of someone. Step 2 is saying how you feel. And you can say something like, when this happens, I am concerned, I feel worried, I am confused, I thought we agreed on this other thing, and now I'm hearing that you want to go back to this initial proposal. So step 2 is also designed to not get any kickback because you're sharing how you feel.
Right.
So no one gets to tell us how to feel. So sometimes people will push back that on us. They'll say, well, oh my gosh, MJ, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You shouldn't feel this way. And I just say, well, I do. Right. And that's why we're having this conversation. So step 3 is asking for what you want instead. So you could say, instead of sending the press release that you're talking about here and that you feel strongly about, could we tweak just this one sentence so that we both feel comfortable with sending it out?
So it sounds like you're describing good communication and the necessity of compromising on the items that are not, the most important.
It could be compromise, or that 3rd step could be, if you really feel strongly about it, saying, I would ask that you trust us to send out the press release that we think will be most helpful to you in this situation. And here's why we think it's the right move.
Yeah. Well, and, oftentimes we're being hired because we're the experts, right? And we're being asked to guide and to lead them. And then sometimes at the 11th hour, someone has a strong preference that might differentiate from what the experts are saying. And, usually I try to yield to my experts, right? I pay them well to advise me well. And if they have the expertise, I should yield to that expertise. So, yeah.
Well, and I love what you said about just being confident in the room as well. There's a lot about just taking up space, having an open posture, having your things around you, taking up space looks more confident. So even small, subtle body language things could help in in a meeting like that with clients where you are trying to convince them or inspire them to go in a slightly different direction than they're looking at.
Yes. And I remind my team, that, hey, we're the trusted expert advisors that they've hired to give them advice. And, it's a mutually beneficial relationship, meaning they're compensating us to provide that counsel. In exchange for that compensation, we're providing them with value. And so there's not an inferior or superior relationship here or subordinate relationship. We're professional colleagues and peers, and we need to treat each other with mutual respect and understanding. So I think that's important too, because oftentimes people will want to position it as, a vendor relationship or something like that, where it's inferior or subordinate relationship. But the truth is that we're providing a valuable service and they're compensating us with corresponding value. So kind of important, I think, for us to remind ourselves and avoid the imposter syndrome, right?
I could not agree more. Yes.
Yeah. So your new book, Leading Through Listening, if our audience wants to acquire this book, how do they go best about doing that?
It's on Amazon, but I would be very happy to provide free electronic copies to anybody who might like those. So,
oh goodness, that's a great offer. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah. How would they go about doing that?
So there is a link that I can provide you if you want to put it in the notes when this podcast goes live. And I don't have it memorized, so I can't share it right at this
We'll
minute.
get it from you offline. No problem.
Okay.
No problem. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you for doing that. And sure. My next question was ultimately, so we've talked about some of your coaching and training programs, your consulting coaching and training programs. If someone is interested in pursuing that with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and learn more about the services that you offer?
The best way is really just to email me. I'm very responsive. So my email address is mj@integratedleader.com.
Got it. Okay. mj@integratedleader.com. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds good. They can also find you on LinkedIn with a username of mjclark22 on LinkedIn. And that probably another way that they could reach you.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, MJ, this has been a great episode. I really enjoyed the topic. You reminded me of some of the practices that I have and share with others, as well as new practices that I might want to consider adopting. So we appreciate you sharing your smarts and your insight today, helping our audience stay on top of PR.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It's good to see you again. I know last time our roles were reversed, where I was doing some teaching for a class that you were doing. So I appreciate the opportunity to have you be on the spotlight today.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, with that, this has been another episode of On Top of PR. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with a friend or colleague who you think would benefit from it, and allow them the opportunity to also stay on top of PR. Thank you for watching.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.